No one would understand our story. I know that. Looking back, even I struggled to make sense of it all, but I lived it. Every beautiful, messy, heart-wrenching moment. It started, as many stories do, in a place I never expected. My marriage to Mark wasn't bad, not in the way you see in movies with slammed doors and screaming matches. It was just quiet. A slow, creeping silence that had filled all the spaces where laughter and conversation used to be. We were roommates who shared a mortgage and a last name. We coexisted, but we weren't connected. I told myself this is normal, that this was just what long-term commitment looked like after the initial spark faded. I was lonely, but I had convinced myself I wasn't allowed to be. Then I met Alex. It was at a work conference, one of those painfully dull events where everyone is just counting the minutes until the open bar. He was the keynote speaker, and I was just another face in the crowd. But when he spoke, it was like he was talking directly to me. He talked about passion, about finding the thing that sets your soul on fire. After his speech, I saw him standing alone, and on a whim, I walked over. I just wanted to tell him how much his words meant to me. What I expected to be a brief, polite exchange turned into a 3-hour conversation. We talked about everything and nothing. Books, travel, our dreams from when we were kids, the strange feeling of being an adult and wondering if you took a wrong turn somewhere. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt heard. It was intoxicating. We exchanged numbers under the guise of professional networking, of course. We both knew it was more than that. The first text came the next day. It was great meeting you. That simple text sparked a fire. Soon we were texting all day, every day. Our conversations were my escape. With Alex, I was witty, I was interesting, I was alive. He saw a version of me that I thought had disappeared long ago, buried under laundry and grocery lists. He remembered the little things I'd mention and would bring them up days later. He made me laugh, a real deep belly laugh that I hadn't felt in years. Mark didn't even notice the change in me. He didn't notice the constant smile on my face as I looked at my phone, or the way I suddenly had more work events in the evenings. The line was blurry before we even crossed it. Was it cheating to share your deepest thoughts with someone else? Was it infidelity to feel more connected to a person through a screen than to the person sleeping next to you? I told myself it wasn't physical, so it wasn't real. A dangerous justification, I know. But I was addicted to the feeling he gave me. The first time we met up after the conference was for coffee. We both knew it wasn't just coffee. Sitting across from him, the chemistry was undeniable. It was a physical pull, a current of energy between us that made the air thick. And that's when it happened. He reached across the table and took my hand. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was just simple touch, but it sent a shockwave through my entire body. In that moment, the digital connection became terrifyingly real. We left the coffee shop and walked through a park. We didn't talk much, we just walked, his hand still holding mine. It felt so natural, so right, and that's what scared me the most. We ended up at my car, and the silence was deafening. I knew I should go home. I knew I should end this right now before it went any further, but I couldn't. He leaned in and he kissed me. It wasn't like the passionless pecks on the cheek I shared with Mark. This was a kiss filled with all the words we hadn't said, all the longing we'd been texting for weeks. It was a confirmation of everything I had been feeling and fearing. I had crossed the line. There was no going back. The affair began in earnest. We stole moments whenever we could, lunch hours that stretched into the afternoon, late-night drives with no destination. We created our own little world, a bubble where our real lives didn't exist. In that bubble, there was no guilt, no Mark, no broken vows. There was only us. I felt a joy I hadn't felt in a decade, but it was always shadowed by a profound sense of shame. I was living a double life, and it was exhausting. I was a different person depending on who I was with. With Alex, I was vibrant and carefree. With Mark, I was distant and irritable, the guilt eating away at me, making me resent him for things that weren't his fault. He was a good man. He didn't deserve this. The problem wasn't him. It was me. I was the one who was broken. I would lie in bed next to Mark, the scent of Alex still on my skin, and my heart would pound with guilt. I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying my choices, feeling like the worst person in the world. How could I do this to the man who had promised to love me, who had built a life with me? But then my phone would vibrate with a message from Alex, and the guilt would momentarily recede, replaced by that addictive rush. I was trapped in a cycle of shame and euphoria. I knew it was unsustainable. I knew something had to break. I just didn't know how to stop it. I was in love with two people at once, and it was tearing me apart. One represented my past, my stability, my comfort. The other represented a future, a passion, a version of myself I desperately wanted to be. The breaking point came on our anniversary. Mark had planned a surprise dinner at the first restaurant we ever went to. He was trying so hard. He gave me a beautiful necklace, and as he put it around my neck, he looked at me with so much love in his eyes, and I felt nothing, just a hollow, empty ache. All I could think about was Alex. I spent the entire dinner checking my phone under the table, waiting for a text that never came because I told him I was busy. As Mark talked about our future, about growing old together, I felt like a fraud. I couldn't do it anymore. The lie was too heavy. That night, I told Mark everything. I didn't spare the details. I felt he deserved the truth, as brutal as it was. Watching his face crumble was the single most painful experience of my life. The man who had been my rock for 15 years looked at me like I was a stranger. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting match. It was the sound of a heart breaking. It was the sound of our world ending. There were no immediate tears from him, just a quiet, devastating shock. He simply got up, went into the guest room, and closed the door. I had shattered our life, and I had to live with the pieces. The days that followed were a blur of hushed, painful conversations. We decided to separate. The life we built was dismantled, box by box. It was clinical and heartbreaking. During this time, I told Alex what had happened. I think a part of me expected him to ride in on a white horse, to tell me we could finally be together, that my sacrifice was worth it. But reality is rarely a fairy tale. Alex was married too. I knew that, of course, but in our bubble, it was a detail we conveniently ignored. Faced with the messy reality of my imploded marriage, the fantasy of our future began to crack. He grew distant. The constant texts slowed to a trickle. Our stolen moments became fewer and farther between. He told me he wasn't ready to leave his wife. He said he loved me, but his kids, his life. He couldn't blow it all up like I did, and just like that, the bubble popped. I was left completely alone, floating in the wreckage of my own making. I had lost my husband, and the man I had lost him for wasn't willing to do the same. The pain of that realization was a different kind of agony. I had gambled everything and lost twice. There was no one to blame but myself. The loneliness that followed was profound. It was a deep, soul-crushing emptiness. I had run from the quiet loneliness of my marriage straight into a loud, screaming void. It's been 2 years now. Mark and I are divorced. He's met someone new, and from what I hear, he's happy. I truly hope he is. He deserves it. Alex and I don't speak anymore. I see his posts on social media sometimes, pictures of him and his wife smiling on vacation. It stings, but it's a dull ache now, not a sharp pain. The first year was the hardest. It was a year of deep reflection, of therapy, of forcing myself to confront the parts of myself I didn't want to see. I had to learn why I looked for validation outside of my marriage and, more importantly, outside of myself. I had to learn to be alone, to be okay with my own company. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, not around a man, but around me. I started painting again, something I'd loved as a kid but had given up. I traveled alone. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to feel whole again. Not because someone else completed me, but because I was finally completing myself. My story isn't a cautionary tale in the traditional sense. It's a story about loneliness, about making terrible choices for what feel like the right reasons at the time. It's about the devastating consequences of seeking happiness in the wrong places. No one would understand our story, the one with Alex and the one with Mark, but I do. I lived it. And in the end, it was the story that forced me to finally find myself. Thanks for listening. If you have a story of your own, I hope you know you're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories.